It's the SNL Hall of Fame podcast with your host, Jamie Dew, Chief Librarian Thomas Senna, and featuring Matt Ardill. And now, curator of the hall, Jamie Dew.
Hey, and welcome to the SNL Hall of Fame Roundtable. It's JD here, and I'm glad to be joining you once again on the SNL Hall of Fame, a podcast which is a weekly affair. Each episode, we take a deep dive into the career of a former cast member, host, musical guest, or writer, and add them to the ballot for your consideration. Once the nominees have been announced, we turn to you, the listener, to vote for the most deserving and help determine who will be enshrined for perpetuity in the hall. Well, this isn't a normal episode. This is a very special episode. We have put all the nominations up. There have been 15 new nominees added to the remaining ballot, and today we're going to invite some people to share their ballots and go from there. So why don't we introduce who we've got? To my immediate right is Jon Schneider. How are you doing, Jon?
I'm doing great, Jamie. Always great to be here. Feet are wiped and ready to go.
Excellent. Oh, I didn't say it. The one time I don't say it.
It's not, we don't, just so you know, like, it's not like a foot fetish thing. Jamie always introduces and tells people to wipe their feet. So it's not Jon being, having a foot thing.
I think Jon just got a little revealing about himself, actually. That's my takeaway.
I mean, they do call this the SNL Hall of Feet, right? That's where we are.
Yes, of course.
Jon's not on his show, so he's getting a little racy. We don't got the teens listening in.
He's got the host belt off.
Let's go.
All right, Andrew.
Hey.
How's it going? Andrew
I
Clark.
am super duper, feeling great. It's very sunny here in Toronto.
Excellent. And Andy Hoglund, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm going good, man. It's Hoglund, though. I'm just going to be straight. It's pronounced Hoglund.
Did I just do it? I just asked you, and
you
then I
just
did
asked
it.
me, so that's why I'm calling it out.
Oh, that's great. No, you can totally do that. Because
no, I'm feeling good, man. I'm surrounded by a couple Canadians, which is cool. I've never had that before. It's like having an orgy with Justin Trudeau. Let's do this. I'm just keeping it racy. Jon set the tone.
Yeah, I thought we were just doing foot stuff, Andy, and you took it to a whole other level.
All right. Let's dive into our program today. The first thing I want to do is to remind everybody who is currently in the SNL Hall of Fame. We've had 2 wonderful seasons, and we've inducted 3 separate classes. The inaugural class was, of course, Lorne Michaels. In this class of season 1, we inducted Dan Aykroyd, Chris Farley, Tina Fey as a writer, Phil Hartman, Steve Martin as a host, Eddie Murphy and Gilda Radner, all, if they weren't noted, were cast members. Then the class of season 2, we had Alec Baldwin as a host, Will Ferrell as a cast member, Bill Hader as a cast member, Tom Hanks as a host, Norm Macdonald as a cast member, Seth Meyers as a writer, Mike Myers as a cast member, and Kristen Wiig as a cast member. So pretty highfalutin company to be, rubbing elbows with, but we've got a really excellent list of nominees. And I just want to go through them for you before we kick off the show, because this is a stellar list right here. Amy Poehler, Beyonce, Bill Murray, Buck Henry, Candice Bergen, Christopher Walken, Conan O'Brien, Dana Carvey, Dave Grohl, Dick Ebersol, Drew Barrymore, Elliot Gould, Elvis Costello, Emma Stone, Franken and Davis, Herb Sargent, Jack Handy, James Downey, Jan Hooks, Jane Curtin, John Belushi, John Goodman, John Mulaney, Justin Timberlake, Lily Tomlin, Maya Rudolph, Melissa McCarthy, Michael O'Donoghue, Miley Cyrus, Molly Shannon, Paul McCartney, Paul Rudd, Paul Simon, Paul LaPel, Prince, Rihanna, Robert Smigel, Scarlett Johansson, The Lonely Island, and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Guys, this would be a great, if this was the lineup for the 50th anniversary show, you would be like, that's a pretty freaking good lineup.
And how did John Belushi get out of hell?
Oh boy. Oh boy. It's on already. Well,
No comment.
let's jump right into it then. We'll start to my right with John. And the way we'll do this is John will announce one of his nominees. I will tabulate it here. I've got a little sheet that I'm keeping score with to make sure that everybody stays in their allotment of 15 votes, up to 15 votes, and to make sure that everybody elects at least one of each of the 4 main categories. There's been a lot of questions with Dick Ebersol being nominated, and he does not fall into any of the 4 categories currently. He is a producer, and that's where he'll stay. So John is going to name his first balloteer, and then I'll go to Andy and Andrew to ask if they have them on their ballot, and we'll go from there. That's how this show is going to work. Let's do it. John, with your first pick, who have you got?
All right.
You're on the clock.
This is a stacked lineup of people to choose from, but looking through, there is one person that I looked at this list and said, there is no question whatsoever that they should not be on everyone's ballot. This person has to get into the SNL Hall of Fame. And it might be a little bit of a hot take, an unconventional pick, but it's Amy Poehler. And the reason why it's Amy Poehler is because she has the highest sketch per episode average among women in the history of the show. If you take out Charlie Rocket, she's actually top 4 among everybody in the history of the show. Before she was on the show was on for 28 years or 27 seasons. There had never been a woman who led a season in sketch appearances until Amy Poehler did that. To me, she is fantastic, did Weekend Update, had amazing characters, impressions, blended a couple of eras. To me, she is a surefire Hall of Famer, slam dunk.
Wow, you heard it here first, folks. Slam dunk. Andy, what do you think?
Respectfully, Amy is not on my ballot, actually. I totally understand John's rationale. I will say, just as a bit of context, when Ryan Tibbs, when he circulates all the Hall of Fame ballots for baseball every year, I'm always fascinated by the rationale that individual voters give or don't give. I just think it's really fascinating color. So just for the listeners to adjust their radio dials to my frequency a little bit, I followed 2 rules when I came up with my ballot. The first is Justice Potter Stewart's famous phrase where he described his threshold for obscenity in his 1964 landmark Supreme Court decision, Jacob versus Ohio. And I know it when I see it, which is to mean I instinctively have a very pure bar for who belongs or does not belong in the Hall of Fame, like, Ted Knighton and Caddyshack. But the second is, also like baseball sports writers, I'm leaning a little bit towards the historic picks, and I'm a little disinclined to give it to some of the newer cast members. So Amy, unfortunately, sort of fell into that category a little bit, where my mind went to more towards people in the 70s or 80s. And Amy, I kind of associate with some of the newer eras, even though it has been 20 years. So she's not on my ballot. And honestly, she kind of mugs it a little bit for me. So I don't like the mugging, and I was just disinclined with everyone else who was available. So
wow, shots fired. Yeah, Andrew, Mr. Clark, I can do that too.
Yes, I did have Amy on my ballot because I think that she was important for the show, like for the success of that show and making it sort of rejuvenate itself when it did. And also I kind of see Amy Poehler and Tina Fey as being very important as influences in comedians who are now in their early 20s, who are inspired by those two. So I kind of, number one, her contributions, the characters that she brought, the writing that she brought, all of those strengths. And then also I think her importance almost as something that people aspired to become. So now we have all these wonderful young comedians, female and female identifying comedians who are doing a lot of work. So I kind of give her props, but I could see, and I agree 100% with Andy, that, we're going to get, as we go down the list, there are some people who are very, very significant in the history of the show that in the 70s that maybe people who just started watching in the last 5 to 10 years won't recognize, who we're going to disappoint each other today, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Short answer. But I got to tell you, I think Amy belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Can I challenge John on air right now?
You can do whatever you want.
John, if I'm not mistaken, I believe you and I are aligned that several of Amy's years are among the show's worst. Is that not accurate?
Yes, there are a couple in there that are rough.
So I just want to throw that out, not to call out, but being the best of the worst, you know,
that is a crazy argument.
Hall of Fame if you're
Stop this. I'm sorry. This is a crazy argument because if you're going to say that, then we're saying anyone who participated in those 2 years. The fact is that Amy Poehler was not a cast member for those 2 years. She was a cast member for much longer. And like I said, I mean, she for 6 years in a row, from 2002 to 2008, every single season she led the cast in sketch appearances. To me, she dominated those years on the show, which, by the way, weren't just those 2 bad years. They led into a golden era of the show, probably for the first time in a generation. So I respect, and I will have people on my ballot who were on the show in the 70s and the 80s, but we're not doing the Hall of Fame of the 70s. We're doing the Hall of Fame of Saturday Night Live, and let's be real, Amy Poehler has been a major part of the second half of the existence of the show.
Yeah, no argument. Just wanted to get that on the record briefly, just for full context that John does think Amy's era is among the worst.
I did not know that is not what I think, but I'll fight you on that another time.
Okay.
Yeah, let's move forward here. And Andrew, we're going to continue with you.
Okay, well, my pick is somebody without whom I don't think there would have been any history of Saturday Night Live. It's someone who, when he sadly passed away, my friends and I held a toga party, for which I was roundly punished by my parents. We were at the ripe old age of 16. I'm talking about John Belushi. So I believe that John Belushi absolutely has to be in the Hall of Fame because he and that cast, and him and Dan Aykroyd particularly, were really what made the whole thing explode. Chevy Chase was a huge part of it, but I think they were the engine that really ran the show. And he was the first true breakout star. He had a much brighter trajectory, if you ask me, than Chevy Chase. So I gotta say, John Belushi's hands down, in my opinion, has to be in.
Great pick.
Thank you,
Andy.
Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, any words to use to describe John Belushi's legacy on SNL or in comedy have already been uttered before. So I don't have too much to contribute beyond that. Continental Divide is an underrated romantic comedy.
All right, Mr. Schneider.
He is definitely on the list. I'm of the belief that every original cast member should be in the Hall of Fame just by default, for what it's worth. But there would be, Saturday Night Live was good, and Chevy obviously brought a lot, but there was nothing like the energy that John Belushi brought to the show. Like, he made it he made it must-watch television because you never knew what he was going to do on a given night, starting all the way from the beginning with the Joe Cocker stuff, moving to the Blues Brothers stuff, like everything. He was a force. So, like Andy said, there's been so much written about him. If you know SNL, you know John Belushi, even if he's been gone for so many years, and that's a testament to the legacy of him. So I think it's a no-brainer to put him in.
Yeah. So that's our first, in honor of the new Zelda game, our first Triforce. So Andy, who have you got up?
I have Bill Murray, who is arguably the most accomplished and talented cast member to come out of the show. I think, all things being equal, he does have a bit of asterisk on his legacy, courtesy of Keke Palmer. But nevertheless, his accomplishments since leaving 8H are unrivaled. Give or take a Ghostbuster, Oscar nomination or Wes Anderson collaboration. But look, like, even those merits aside, Murray is a pivotal figure in the show's history, the first replacement cast member. There's been 170 cast members in the show's history. 8 or 9, like John just mentioned, are that original 1975, upstart, not ready for primetime players. Murray sets the mold for joining a cast in midstream, which is a path that almost everyone else in the show's history has had to emulate in one way or another. And look, I'll be honest, I'm not in high school anymore. That combination of smarm and self-aware irony that made him a legend to Letterman fans and the geeks and freaks and geeks, it doesn't quite do it for me as it once did. But still, honker, the nerds, Nick the Lounge Singer, his awards commentary on Update. These are essential early SNL characters. The show simply post-Chevy doesn't exist without them. So that's my argument. I'm sticking to it.
John, how do you feel about Bill Murray?
Yeah, I totally agree. He's definitely a shoe-in for me for the Hall of Fame. His analytics are off the charts. He's also a top 5 sketch per episode getter in the history of the show. He was producing every single night once he finally found his groove, I guess, towards the end of season 2. And he, you don't think of him necessarily when you look back at season 3, 4, 5. A lot of people don't think of him as the star, but he really, really was. He was so good and did so much. And I totally agree with Andy. I think that the show's in a dark, dark place if he doesn't jump onto it when he did. So for me, I mean, think about that, right? We may end up talking about Jim Downey at some point tonight. I mean, the fact that Bill Murray and Jim Downey joined the show to add some life into it when the show is losing Chevy. I mean, just incredible stuff. So for me, can't have a Hall of Fame without Bill Murray.
Well, we're breaking all the rules of podcasting and radio by agreeing with one another. But Bill Murray, absolutely. Some people get changed by being on Saturday Night Live. Bill Murray changed Saturday Night Live. He didn't alter himself, I don't believe at all, when he went on that show. He had deep, Second City chops. The reports about him when he was in Toronto are legendary. How he would deal with hecklers. We'll just leave it at that. He didn't take crap from anybody. And he's had an absolutely stunning career, dramatically and comedically, right? And I've worked with Robin Duke, who's just retired at Humber. And, some of the stories she talked about, Bill Murray sort of helping her when she was on Groundhog Day and explaining how the cameras worked and how you had to sort of act in order so the editing could happen, shows you that it's not only kind of a creative genius, it's a real technical skill and an understanding of how movies and stuff work. So I think that all goes together for Bill Murray. I agree. He absolutely should be in there.
Great. Wow. Another Triforce. Boom. Where are we at then? We're back to John, right? Yeah. Okay, John. Create some controversy.
I mean, I think controversy was already created when
I suppose so.
Yeah, well, even going into last season, when the biggest travesty to be left out of getting into the Hall of Fame to me was Jan Hooks, because that was insane to me. I mean, you're talking about, Andy was talking about what he sees when he looks for in a cast member. The eye test is definitely there when
I was blown away.
Yeah, I mean, this is insanity. I mean, she comes in season 12. Just is incredible. Like, just can do everything that you possibly would have wanted on the show. And just the heart and soul of that second generation, the second golden era of the show. And obviously we lost her in 2014. And it was just, her, thinking about the stuff she produced with Phil Hartman and stuff is so heartwarming. So many great sketches, so many amazing impressions to me. I always, hear from people who were just obsessed with Jan Hooks, absolutely fell in love with her on the show. And it wasn't even just that she was, so beautiful in the way that she performed. She was just so naturally talented and gifted to be on the show. And it was so important for the generation that was to come. You hear Tina Fey and Amy Poehler and Maya Rudolph talk about how Jan Hooks was so important. Tina Fey put Jan Hooks on 30 Rock at some point. That's the type of thing that, she left a legacy behind. And to me, she needs to be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I agree. She finished last vote with 40%, 39.8%. She's got a long hill ahead. I'm afraid it's not going to happen in this round for her either. But I agree with you. It's shameful. She's an all-timer. She's an all-timer. She's in the female Rushmore, right? Or the female SNL cast Rushmore. Everything
that John said about Amy Poehler is true about Jan Hooks. I'm going to do a hot take there.
Minus the analytics.
Well, that's Mike Murray.
So you have her, is it safe to say then, in your Hall of Fame, Andy?
Absolutely. And it doesn't, I don't even know why we should justify it. It's so clear to me that she belongs there. Why even, let's have like 30 seconds of dead space and then just move on,
Yeah. I mean, I think part of what Jan Hook and people in that cast suffer from a little bit is that skip between internet and not internet. So a lot of the stuff comes later. And so the other cast members, the later cast members, their stuff is available online a lot more easily than Jan Hook's stuff, because when it's getting filmed, it's not been signed off copyright for dispersal on the web and everything. So you have to work harder to get some of it. So I think actually there's just people who haven't seen what she did with Phil Hartman as much. You kind of have to be a bit more of an aficionado. But yeah, there's absolutely no question. The stuff she did with Phil Hartman alone is so iconic for that show. I mean, it's hard to imagine her without it. And the range of characters, and also doing she kind of epitomized a kind of like, I don't know how to put it, not post-feminist angst being rung through Reaganomics and then through the Clinton era and everything. That kind of, there was always a real edge to her material, even if she was doing like a sweet domestic character.
Oh, she was great. She was just great. I just recently watched the Alec Baldwin diner sketch, and just so funny, She's just natural. Gosh. Okay, so far we've had hooks on all 3 ballots, another Triforce. That one actually makes a triangle in my little spreadsheet that I made. Wow, that's funny. So we're going to come back to Andrew Clark, and I'm going to challenge you to do something other than a cast member.
Okay, well, for me, then I would go with Christopher Walken as host.
Great.
Even though I spoke about Elliot Gould as host this season,
Yeah.
I would make an argument for him too. But it's hard to make the argument over Christopher Walken because of his relationship with the show. You can almost give it to him just for cowbell, because it's become, when your sketch has its own range of T-shirts, not just a T-shirt, but range, you've entered the vernacular. I think Christopher Walken was a sort of must-watch host. People will always be attentive. He, again, didn't let the show really change what he did. He sort of brought what he did into the show. The fact that he has so many iconic characters as a host, I think is a good argument for Christopher Walken to be, in the Hall of Fame as a host.
Great. John or Andy, do either of you have Mr. Walken in the Hall of Fame on your ballot?
I do.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, look, he has his own best of, right? He has recurring characters. I mean, I don't remember offhand. I defer to John on the number of times that he's literally hosted, but
8.
It almost gets to the point where when you have that body of work, you're not a cast member, but there's just so much there that your tombstone deserves a reference to your time with the show. So shout out to the Continental. And yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah,
John?
same here. He was, I'll say he was a little bit more borderline for me. Nothing against Walken. He did make my ballot, but he was close to being cut because there's a lot of really good options this time, including among the hosts. I don't think I wouldn't put him in the upper pantheon of greatest hosts in the history of the show. I think he's unless you're going to put all the 5-timers there, but I think he's in that next grouping, and he's probably near the top of that. So for me, there was a few of those on the list, and he just made it.
Oh, wow. Okay. You guys have agreed a lot. So we'll go to Andy. And Andy, I'll challenge you to do the same thing, something that isn't in the cast member category.
Yeah. No, not a challenge at all. It's the next name on my list, matter of fact.
Oh.
It's Buck Henry. Bring him on as a host. One of the early important hosts who kind of validates the show, right? Because Buck Henry belongs in a different comedic generation, Get Smart and all that, But he's a steady presence during those first 5 years, lending a lot of credibility. And then, if I recall correctly, is the host of the final show of that era too. And John mentioned Jan Hooks on 30 Rock. I mean, as Jane Krasinski's mom, Buck Henry as Liz Lemon's dad was always so funny to me. But I think his tenure on SNL throughout those first 5 years definitely warrants his inclusion onto the Hall, and has one of the darkest sketches in the show's history. And I love when the show kind of makes a bold play like that and makes child molesting part of the fun, because you don't see that enough. People are so uptight. Wouldn't you agree, John?
I mean, can't not watch Uncle Roy. I was blessed to get to talk about Buck Henry on one of the episodes of the SNL Hall of Fame. So I've made my case for him. I am as big of a fan as Buck Henry as anyone could possibly be. think he is so good. People say Steve Martin could have been a cast member. Well, I think Buck Henry could have been a cast member. He fit in so seamlessly. We talk a lot about Buck being the one who would take the sketches that no one else wanted to take. That is such an important role as a host. And I do believe for decades when they, bring on hosts, they use Buck Henry as a template for what they look for if a host will return or not. They judge them on the Buck Henry category. Like, did you do the Buck stuff? And I think that he is just, to me, I mentioned, the upper pantheon of hosts. I think he's in that top room of greatest hosts in the history of the show.
Andrew.
Yeah, you're probably going to regret me on the show because I'm just going to keep going, oh, yeah, that guy was great. But with Buck Henry, I think the other thing that he did for the show was he lent a certain gravitas to the show because you remember he's someone who adapted Catch-22. He did The Owl and the Pussycat. He worked as a co-writer on The Graduate. So he's kind of like Hollywood hip. And so being on Saturday Night Live really, I think, gave that element to the show, and of course to him as well. And then he did so fantastically, and he's always so game. So I agree with John's point. Like, if when you hear people interviewed who was a great host, they always seem to say cast members, it doesn't matter which cast, say the host was game. They were willing to try. They were willing to do something, and you got that in spades with Buck Henry. He was obviously happy to be there, and yeah, some seminal characters and a lot of his work later. I still love his work in The Player. It's The Graduate, but with a stroke. I mean, he had those improvisational chops that he brought to the show.
Or Heaven Can Wait. He's great in that.
There you go.
Another Triforce. Holy. John, will you throw a curveball here and strike us out? I'm going to challenge you again to pick from another category.
Sure. I'd love to.
Other than cast members.
I mean, I'm going to try and do something that I've been trying to do since this podcast started, which is get The Lonely Island into the Hall of Fame. I mean, what is going on with people? I mean, do they not realize that they changed Saturday Night Live for the better? Like, the show you're watching now is influenced by The Lonely Island more than most of the names on this list. Like, let's just be real. So, and outside of SNL was often, influenced by The Lonely Island, including a lot of things you see on social media now. So, but if we're just talking about what happened on the show, I mean, these guys came in, they wrote brilliant pre-tape sketches. They went viral. People who were not watching Saturday Night Live came back to the show because of the things that The Lonely Island was producing. They were largely responsible for creating cast members becoming huge stars, and as hosts as well. I mean, they would bring in, hosts into these music videos or sketches that they were doing, and then people would learn and get to know these hosts, and they would become bigger stars outside of the show. And then, every now and then they throw in this random music video with an artist that would just come in. It's like, oh my God, T-Pain is here now. Like, just the craziness that they would get into. I mean, there's a lot of hyperbole when it comes to The Lonely Island, but I think it's well deserved because they are some of the greatest writers in the history of the show.
Absolutely. 100%. The most baffling thing so far that has occurred in the Hall of Fame is the voting for The Lonely Island. 52% to start, and last year it went up to 62.6%, so just a smidge under the requisite 66.6. But I just can't figure it out. I've made a correction on the ballot this year, and I've included any of the group for Davis, Franken and Davis, for example. I have a parenthetical: Al Franken, Tom Davis. I have, for Lonely Island, I have it broken down by their members too, so people can see maybe Andy Samberg and have a better understanding. We'll see. We'll see. Does anybody else have The Lonely Island on their ballot?
I didn't, and I think that says more about me than it does The Lonely Island, to be quite honest, because I think John made a very strong case, and I think they're hurt a little bit by being a group, to be honest, and not just a person. And then when I think about MacGruber, which is my favorite film of all time, and that it comes out of The Lonely Island with Jorma directing it, then I almost should just make The Lonely Island, put them back onto my ballot just based on that MacGruber comes out of it. Yeah, I would just say they weren't on mine, but I think that has more to say about me than it does to say about The Lonely Island, quite honestly, because I don't think at the time when I was watching it that I understood how important those videos were for bringing new viewers to the show via online, not through traditional broadcast. And then, of course, later on, I don't want to go on and on, but stopping that comes
sorry.
out of it.
Yeah, brilliant.
Or what was like one of my daughter had like on a loop. So I think I'm going to plead the old man card slightly here, and so I will yield if need be and put them on. I'm a pushover, I'm afraid, but they weren't on. But that doesn't mean they don't deserve to be. I'm going to be far too agreeable. I'm sorry. I apologize. I will start to be mean.
Do you have space on your ballot? Did you use all 15 votes?
I'd have to get rid of somebody. Let's see. It would have to be a writer, wouldn't it? Well, see, I have Jack Hand. Well, I shouldn't give it away. So
Yeah.
I would have to give away somebody. Can I wait and see?
Of course.
Yes. We're going to convince you.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'll put him on ice for now.
Andy, where are you at? Do you
They're
have a
on
Lonely Island on yours?
I'm embarrassed to say that they're not on mine. I totally agree with everything that Jon said. You know, we're definitely still in the shadow of the Lonely Island, 15 years later. Please Don't Destroy, Pete Davidson and Chris Redd. Like, these guys are making just really pale imitations of what Lonely Island did. And you can't write the history of YouTube without Lonely Island, right? Like, you really can't. I'm embarrassed, but my philosophy going into this was they'll have time to make it into the Hall of Fame. Buck Henry won't. Buck Henry's dead. He's not coming back. The
Lonely Island is not on the
show.
show anymore, Andy. I just want you to know that. They're not producing new content. They're both Buck Henry and the Lonely Islands. Their careers at SNL are done.
No, but Andy Samberg could come back and host. Like, there's
But this is not an Andy Samberg hosting thing. This is the Lonely Island as writers on the show.
As writers on the show. See, okay, well, all right. Well, let's get cute about this. Okay.
Samberg
John, your
will
whole
definitely be
argument was
nominated
about
at some
the
point,
videos.
I'm sure.
Hold on. Let's just double check for a second. So it says Lonely Island as a writer. So that means it's not really the videos, right? It's about
They
writing.
wrote all the videos.
Well, yes, but when you watch those videos, you're like, the writing is really what makes it here, or is it Andy Samberg's performance, or is it T-Pain singing? So if we want to get cute for a second, maybe they don't go on.
It's not that at all. It's the writing. What? This is insane.
If you're a sketch troupe, you're likely going to be attributed writer status to everything you do, whether it's performance or not.
I guess my point is maybe Samberg should be a Hall of Famer as a cast member. Maybe Lonely Island. Maybe it's not their time yet. I don't know. There's a lot of competitive people here, and if I want to justify myself, which I do, it's maybe the category's not right. Maybe they shouldn't be here as a writer right now.
Interesting. Well, we shall see.
This is the most insane thing I've ever heard. I love Andy. This is insane. Okay, nobody is walking around being like, "Oh yeah, love it when Rihanna was like, oh yeah, that was that." Like, it was the Lonely Island. It wasn't the people appearing in the sketches with them. Like, that was great. That was a cherry on top. But this is an insane take.
Well, I'm not sure what that meant, but
okay, sorry. You drove me nuts. That's what.
I don't know who Rihanna is. First of all.
Sorry, Canadians.
Look. I mean, this is an important argument to have. I just wonder. I mean, the MacGruber thing, that almost, if you guys want to call me out on my BS here, you should say they wrote MacGruber, they should be in,
they wrote MacGruber, they should be in.
Thank you, Andrew.
That's the guy who doesn't have it on their ballot.
My man. There you go.
I'm easily pushed around. I just want to establish that. I hope I'm established that for anybody listening at the moment. But yeah, I'm going to come up tough soon. Believe me.
If it was Samberg as a cast member, I'd be like, but I don't know. Does the whole group deserve to be in?
Yes.
Maybe
unequivocally.
Not. Maybe so.
I think.
So can I just ask? Sorry, Jamie. I know we don't want to do 20 minutes on the Lonely Island, but I just have to ask just one more question. Yeah. Just succinctly explain to me your thesis statement for why the Lonely Island should not be in the Hall of Fame right now.
Absolutely. So, as I said at the start of this podcast, if John, you want to rewind a couple minutes, I said that my approach is similar to the sports writers who philosophically have blinders on and say, I'm not going to vote for anyone from the steroids era. There's sports writers who say Clemens, Bonds, they just don't deserve to be in. Or they say, oh, well, maybe this person will get in on a later ballot. But right now, historically, I want to get Michael O'Donoghue in, or I want to get Harold Baines in, or whatever, you know? So it's just my argument is more philosophic than it is a representation of their legacy on the show. Because what you said actually was very eloquent and well put. But this is a competitive conversation, and there's a lot of other people who I think aren't in the Hall of Fame yet, you know, including Bill Murray, including, you know, for God's sakes, Dana Carvey. They pick up the slots. The slots get eaten up. I'm sorry. By people who've been waiting for years, John. Years.
They've got the call now, though.
Exactly. Think of Dana Carvey at home right now, you know, with his sons, how he's going to feel when Jamie calls him and let him know. Do you want to deny him that,
Let
John?
him know that he can win one of these.
Oh, wow. Let me just say to all the listeners as we wrap up this conversation, Andy Hoglund is unequivocally wrong about this. Please think about the history of the show and how influential these guys are.
Think about how Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds aren't in the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's where I'm coming from.
Listen,
Yeah, but they potentially cheated.
yeah,
Like,
it's not even, it's apples and
Not
oranges.
potentially, they did cheat, but who cares? So did Willie Mays. Willie Mays cheated. Who cares?
Yeah, I remember all
All
those
right,
times we were covering the show, and then we found out that Yorma was doing steroids. Like, how crazy was that?
That's right. I'm sure they were.
Cocaine is the steroids of Studio 8H.
Belushi out.
Yeah, right.
All right, Andrew, who have you got next?
I'm going to make things a little controversial, and I'm going to pick Prince as the musical guest.
Oh, okay.
I believe he was on 4 times. Every time is a home run. It's Prince. He's the greatest. Like, he should just get in on virtue of having been Prince.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit of a fan, but I also think that Prince always brought a little bit of a sense of humor about himself, even when he was being the most Prince-like, so to speak. And I also speak as someone who saw Prince live, and he was an absolutely, unquestionably, probably one of the greatest performers I've ever seen. So I'm going to say Prince as musical guest. I want to put it out there. Everybody vote for Prince.
Does anybody else have Prince on their ballot?
I don't. I mean, I love Prince. Prince, I would die for you. But I just...
Jesus, John, don't.
But yeah, I mean, the musical guest category for me is as limited as could possibly be because there are so many stacked people in the other categories.
Yeah.
So for me, I had to pick one, maybe two, but one that I think is at the top of that list. And unfortunately, there are other people that did have more influence on SNL than Prince did.
I should think Prince has a career that the trajectory is similar to SNL. It's a few years off, but that first performance in 79, I think it is like really, really good. And he's sort of unknown, you know, he's just this, you know, performer, one of those cool ones that you get to see on SNL, and turns out they turn into, you know, a really big deal. And then the right parenthetical on the end of his career is just the legend of him playing it was the 40th, right?
That's right.
The
He's
after
the
party,
one.
you know? So really interesting. Cool. Andy, who have you got up next?
My next person is, actually, we talked about this briefly, Dana Carvey. How is Dana Carvey not in this Hall of Fame yet? Is this really his first ballot?
This is his first ballot, yeah. Well, because we produce the show where we, you know, have an allotment every year, right? It's staggered. It's just staggered across the board because I didn't think of this idea in 1980. If I did, you know, that would have been
Well,
a bomb.
that's neither here nor there. I mean, to me, Dana Carvey, you could argue, is the best pure cast member in the show's history. So the fact that he's just now on the first ballot and isn't yet in the Hall of Fame, it raises a lot of troubling questions.
Do you think he will get a higher voting percentage than the current holder, which is Will Ferrell?
Probably not, just because Will Ferrell came of age as a cast member with people who, you know, maybe participating in this a little bit more. I mean, that's the only argument that I could really understand, is that Carvey's, you know, made his debut 37 years ago. You know, so maybe people don't quite appreciate. But when I started watching SNL in the 90s, I mean, Garth, Hans and Franz.
Oh my God.
You know, just
absolutely. That's
so
when I
many
started
home
watching.
runs.
That's when I
Here's the
started.
major
I started watching in 86. It's 91.8% is what Will Ferrell got last year.
Here's the major difference, though, is that Will Ferrell dominated his era, whereas Dana Carvey didn't. He's definitely on my ballot, and I agree with the notion that he's one of the best cast members of all time, but he is among a group of elite cast members, including Phil and Jan, and he slides into that generational group really well. But yeah, the reason that I loved how Andy said best is because best is typically defined as having like the skill set to succeed on the show. Right? It's like, are you a naturally born sketch performer that was just built in a lab to do Saturday Night Live?
Yeah.
And Dana Carvey is that. So
Characters, impressions. Yeah, I mean, to John's point, and this kind of goes back to our initial conversation about Amy Poehler, Will Ferrell is on at a time that I wouldn't consider a golden age, so he dominated. Yeah. Dana Carvey is probably the best or among the best cast members of obviously a golden age, a second golden age.
It's like Murderers Row, though. It's like, how do you pick between Gehrig and Babe, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, they were both first balloters.
Yeah.
And he's also working with Mike Myers.
That's right.
Right at this, who's also, and he's sort of Garth to Mike. I mean, I would agree that he definitely should be in, because if you tried to order an SNL cast member over the phone and then Amazon shipped it to your house, it would be Dana Carvey.
Right.
Right. He literally epitomizes all of the things that you would want. And, I think he's for me, he's unquestionable.
Cool. Back to John.
yeah, so I'm going to round out my cast category, if that's okay with you, Jamie, with someone who I think was so important in the history of the show, and that's Jane Curtin. She comes in to host Weekend Update right after Chevy Chase and just absolutely crushes it. Shows everybody why, she was meant to do that job. And it was, it was a man's world, unfortunately, at the time. A lot of people felt like it. And like for her to break through that mold was so great. And I mean, let alone not only the stuff on Weekend Update, but the fact that she would anchor sketches the way that she did and play that straight woman role so well, where she would be like, think about like Looks at Books and sketches like that, where she would be side by side with Gilda Radner, and Gilda would be doing a crazy character, or her interactions with Emily Latella or Rosanna Dana. She was like, to me, the host of the 70s among the cast, and she is one of my favorite cast members of all time, if I'm being completely honest. Just her ability to just show like the strength and poise that she did on that show when all this craziness was happening around her. So for me, a shoe-in as well.
Great. Nicely put. Andrew?
Well, you make some great points, and I didn't have her. And again, it's no knock on her, but she wasn't there only because, although I think she was an integral part of that cast, if there was one person that maybe, it's a terrible thing to say, honestly. It sounds like such an awful thing to say. But if she had not, if she wasn't there, would things be that much different? I don't know necessarily that they would, but again, she's incredibly talented. Nobody we're discussing here is bad. Let's put it that way. So if they're not getting in, it's not for any deficit on their part. And I think you're making some great points about her. And I've heard those arguments made like, hey, Jane Curtin was great. She's not getting her props by other people as well. So I don't think you're in a minority, John. So, you make a good case, but she wasn't on mine.
Can I push back, Andrew, for a second? Because you discussed the your argument is based in value, right? If you were to take Jane Curtin out, how does that change the 70s? So if you were to remove her from the cast and then everything happens as is, so Chevy Chase leaves the show, who to you then replaces Chevy on Update, and would that be better? Because I can't envision a scenario where that happens.
Neither can I. I don't know how to answer that question. I think you make a good point. I guess it's more on the lines of I'm looking at my list and thinking who would I bump for Jane Curtin? If it happens, I'd be happy. You know what I mean? If she gets in, I'll be super happy because I think she's absolutely brilliant. I guess you use the word host in a way. I think maybe she hadn't got some of her credit because she was an anchor, and maybe that's and literally and figuratively in an improv sense, she was an anchor in a lot of those scenes, and the anchor doesn't always get all of the attention. She's a little bit, I hate to put like football analogy, like the offensive lineman. They only get noticed if they make a mistake. If they do their job really well, it doesn't always get seen. And I feel like in her cast, maybe Jane Curtin was a little bit like that. There were other people getting all the press, and she wasn't getting in the press for bad reasons, like bad behavior and those sorts of things. But I can't answer your question. I don't know who I would put in. You're absolutely right.
Somewhere right now, Jane Curtin is flashing her bra at the screen, just hearing about getting some attention.
Well, perhaps. I hope so.
John,
And if she is Jane, I think you're great.
I'm just getting dirty.
All right, Andy, where are you with Jane Curtin?
Well, so John detected I flinched a little bit when he brought her up, and it's because, to be candid, about 10 minutes ago, I realized with the quirks of us picking one from each category, like Noah's Ark, I'd inadvertently left off a musical guest. So as we were talking, I had to remove Jane Curtin from my ballot. She was on there, and I needed to add a musical guest. So Elvis Costello, today's your lucky day. But Jane Curtin, unfortunately, gets the stick, not the carrot.
Wow, I'm pretty stunned. This is going to be an interesting vote this year if you three are representative of the majority.
I'd love to keep her on, but it just the way this is set up, we have to include a musical guest because, like I said, philosophically, a part of me is like, if Eminem's not on, I don't know if anyone deserves to be on. But
right, all right, Andrew, your next pick.
So then I will be picking from the writer category because I've picked a host, I picked a performer, and I picked a musical guest. Correct?
Right.
And this is going to be very, very difficult for me because I spoke. I was happy enough to speak about someone who I don't think I'm going to nominate because does that make any sense?
I mean, I think the way it's put is there's what 45 nominees?
Yeah,
something like that. There's a lot of really talented people, and you got to nominate one, but it doesn't mean that when you nominated them, maybe you were influenced by a couple of the other episodes.
Well, no, I gotta go with James Downey as a first ballot.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think there's no show without him. He was the guy who also brought a certain impartiality to it. And by that, he always pushed back whether it was left or right of center politically. He came to Humber and did a workshop for us. And it was great to hear, him talk about the work. And one thing I remember him saying was, a student asked him about Norm Macdonald and the O.J. Simpson jokes and why did they keep going? And I think he compared it almost to Thelma and Louise, like driving off the cliff. Like they just couldn't stop. They didn't even dislike O.J. or Ebersol, any of those things. They just had to keep going. When you look at his influence, particularly on American elections, just some of his, So to me, it's Jim Downey for sure for the writer category, even though I would love to mention Jack Handy, who I'm a huge fan of, but I'm going to go James Downey for my pick today.
Okay. Well, you can have more than one writer. You can do whatever you wish, but I will say James Downey. I'm really interested to hear what Andy and John have to say. Do either of you have James Downey on your ballot?
Absolutely.
You both do. So Andy, tell us why he's on your ballot.
Yeah, I mean, but Andrew hit the nail on the head. Jim Downey was on the show for over 30 years. He's one of the most important writers in the show's history. He's one of the most important, political satirical minds or whatever, however you want to put it. I love that he's even technically a former cast member. He just checks so many of the boxes and probably behind the scenes contributed to so many of the cast members that we love too. Like he's talked about, his role helping Chris Farley with some of his characters and moments on the show. And not for nothing, also want to shout out his role in There Will Be Blood. Love his little part as Al Rose as well too. So I'm a huge Downey fan, and he 100% gets my endorsement.
John,
greatest writer in the history of the show, no doubt, gets in.
Great. Okay.
Do you think that There Will Be Blood appearance was influenced by his appearance in, was it Tommy Boy or
Billy Madison?
Billy Madison.
I've always wondered that.
That wonderful speech. I wonder.
P.T. Anderson is a huge SNL fan, right? Like he was there in those early 2000 days when he was courting Maya Rudolph. So yeah, probably. I mean, he's cast as Smigel too in Punch Drunk Love. So.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that was Smigel. Andy, who have you got next on your ballot?
The next person on my ballot, and I apologize, I'm going alphabetical, is Dick Ebersol, actually, who I don't know if that's going to be contentious or not, but a part of me is like, you can't write the history of the show without him. He helps create the show in '70, and then he, is such an important, voice behind the scenes that allowed the show to exist until Lorne Michaels came out of his hibernation. So there's no Eddie Murphy without Dick Ebersol, and just an important person in the history of American broadcasting. So
why is there no Eddie Murphy without Dick Ebersol?
Because while Eddie is under Gene Dominion's tenure, technically, Ebersol is the one that doesn't fire Eddie and then allows Eddie to become as big as he does during his time of the show. But I appreciate the pushback there.
No, I was just gonna say, like, if you got delivered like a really good steak and it's like sitting on your desk, like, you're not gonna eat it.
Right. But he doesn't can Eddie either, and I don't know. I think that it's still, nevertheless, it still exists. But I kind of think of it as, the Baseball Hall of Fame. You gotta have some executives in there too, or Melvin Miller should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame as well.
Absolutely.
Too, right? And Ebersol, I think, is that kind of figure. So yeah, that's my take.
An architect.
Yes.
John or Andrew, is Ebersol on either of your ballots?
He's not on my ballot, for what it's worth. I do think he should be in the Hall of Fame, and I think he should get the Lorne Michaels honorary award that you gave to Lorne to put in there, because I think he's of a category of his own. But I didn't put him in because, as he is known as his first name, he's kind of a dick. So I sort of left him off.
Oh, that's the bar?
Yeah, that's the bar.
Isn't John Belushi on your list?
Yeah. Look, it's really hard no, the real reason, to be honest, is just I'm looking through this, and he makes no sense to put him in any category with any of these other people. So for me, it's like his contributions are so different than everybody else here. It's like comparing apples and oranges to me. So I couldn't put him on my list, but I also know he needs to be in there.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have him. And, there's some good points, but I don't know. I'd almost say, well, then maybe Rosie Schuster, only because she played an important part of those first few seasons.
When did she run SNL?
She never ran it, but she certainly played a huge role creatively.
No, I know.
Was married to Lorne, and is very funny. Wrote for the Larry Sanders Show, but I would demur. But I do think he should be in. So I just don't know where you put him. So I think an honorary exec category. Maybe we should start.
Yeah,
the Melvin Miller category.
That's a great idea. All right.
There's a lot of behind the scenes people there, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I even think the announcer. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head.
Don Pardo.
Daryl Hammond.
Jeez Louise. Right. Like, Don Pardo should be in. For sure.
I would recommend to the committee at the SNL Hall of Fame to consider a once a year award to just give someone an auto pass in.
Yeah, Dick Ebersol, Don Pardo, Jeff Richards, Patrick Weathers, Eminem.
Stop it.
Yeah.
James
but I mean, Andy's making a good point, because it was Dick Ebersol, along with Barry Dillard and a few others, who approached Lorne Michaels a bit. So he's sort of like is the opening of the door, so to speak.
Yeah.
I don't know how influential he was in giving Lorne Michaels a long run. I think it was 17 episodes or something that they guaranteed. But yeah, it's hard to imagine, but I guess it's spoiled for choice a little bit here.
John, who have you got next?
So I'll put somebody in from the musical guest category who, to me, is going in just for really fitting into all categories, and that would be Paul Simon. He is not in the Five Timers Club, but he is an amazing host and musical guest in the history of the show. Also, very influential in a lot of, creative, I'm sure, by becoming very good friends with Lorne Michaels. But yeah, I mean, Paul Simon hosts the most unique episode in the history of Saturday Night Live, the second episode of the show, has some really, really great appearances. He basically retires.
Paul Simon variety show, you mean?
Yeah. Basically, exactly. Basically retires on the show. Most recently, when Seth Meyers hosted the show, he pretty much just retired from music after that. But you see his entire career throughout throughout the history of the show. And, I wouldn't necessarily, like, if someone says, hey, like, John, who's the greatest musical guest in the history of the show? Paul Simon wouldn't be top of mind, but because Paul Simon is in the musical guest category and he also has those hosting appearances and additional cameo appearances, for me, just his contribution to the history of the show would lead him to be my number one musical guest choice.
Does he appear on any other ballots?
No, not mine. Just Prince.
Because he's Prince. He already outlined
No, I'm saying no. Why not Paul Simon? Like, what's the reason for not putting Paul Simon on the ballot?
I guess I just like Prince better, but I can't make any rational argument against Paul Simon. So I'll just instead of pleading the fifth, I'll plead the Prince.
Okay.
But I think that next to Paul McCartney, maybe Lord Michaels has a thing for Pauls, but I think as a musical influence, and I think and I don't want to speak for, obviously I'm not speaking for Lord Michaels, but I think he always saw the show as part of that whole experience for that generation, which was music being so important. Paul McCartney and Paul Simon, the two Pauls are the sort of musical anchors of that show, so to speak. And of course, they're, I think, part of his identity as a baby boomer and a member of that wave.
How about you, Andy?
I did not have him on my ballot. As mentioned, I'm just sort of disinclined to have musical guests on here. It's just not where I went. The one that I have is Elvis Costello, like I mentioned, but John makes a excellent historic argument in favor of Mr. Simon.
Okay, let's move forward then with Andrew's next pick.
I've got somewhat of a, I think will be controversial pick, which is Maya Rudolph.
Oh, okay. Why do you think it's controversial?
Well, I guess when we start looking at everybody, I mean, everybody's so impressive. So maybe I'm just getting starstruck. But for my money, Maya Rudolph should be in the Hall of Fame because of her unbelievable character work and her range, especially musically. Bronx Beat was always one of my favorite sketches that she did with Amy Poehler. So I see her as someone who belongs in the Hall of Fame. But I think if you're looking, and I'll leave it to Andy and John, but historically, I think you can argue for other people. Like, John could say, how can you have Maya Rudolph in if you're not going to have Jan Kurt? Like, how does that make any sense whatsoever? So I'm going partly on my own instinct and intuition, which is not always rational. But I'm going to say Maya Rudolph. I have, and she was pretty quick for me to pick her. So
okay,
I'm going to go for Maya Rudolph.
How about you, gentlemen? Is Maya Rudolph on either of your ballots? No. And is there any remorse here?
There is.
Based on what you've heard, or?
Yeah, I mean, look, personal taste. She's definitely on my ballot. I love her on the show. She was, actually watching it growing up. Her leaving the show was one of the most impactful losses I felt while watching the show, because I think that she's so important and such a great cast member. But just in terms of where we are at right now in the SNL Hall of Fame voting, there are a lot of cast members I would put above her. And even in her own era, I don't think she was ever the number one cast member. And right now I'm voting in people who are really dominated the field.
Yeah. And I mean, you've only got 4 votes left as well. So at this point, they become more valuable, sort of, right?
Right.
All right. Andy.
Yeah. I mean, look, I like Maya Rudolph. Again, I'm just a little disinclined to have someone who is part of this millennium. That's just again how I went about it. I'm a little bit more slanted to people from the 70s, 80s, 90s. Actually, I have a lot of writers on my ballot, to be honest. That said, one other historic host that did make it, that we've talked about briefly, is Elliot Gould. Again, kind of similar to Buck Henry, just someone who gets the show early on, kind of brings some cachet when the show needs it, makes it hip. And I think generally people just forget about what a big star Elliot Gould was in the 70s, Long Goodbye and whatnot. So he's next up. I'm not sure if my comrades are with me on this one, but I think you think about the Mount Rushmore of guests outside Steve Martin and Buck Henry in the 70s, you got to go with Elliot Gould.
I think in the 70s is what is key here. That's why I don't have him on my list right now. I do think he is definitely a Hall of Famer, but I just think that there's hosts that are above him that transcended multiple eras that I think are more impactful, I would say.
Let's not forget about his season 6 stint, where he's in bed with Denny Dillon and Gail Mathias and whatnot.
I'm not forgetting about that, but I think like, him hosting. I didn't. I just think in a span of, those, I guess, like 5 years in one episode, it's still like all in the same generation for the most part. So for me, it was a debate for me between Christopher Walken and Elliot Gould, who would take that last spot on my ballot. And I'm pretty sure that Elliot Gould would make my next year's ballot, but I have other hosts that I think are more important, or personally ones that I think are more impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I was between Christopher Walken and Elliot Gould for me, and I actually was able to talk about Elliot Gould on the show, and I think, your points are great. The other thing, of course, was you saw his musical chops. Like, he had a musical theater background. I think every one of his opening monologues was as a musical number. And he was the first one where the female cast members pretended to have a crush on him. He was the one who came on the show and canceled Star Trek. So he did a lot of really great stuff. And I think the other thing that was neat was his last appearance on the show. I don't know that if he knew, I don't think he knew Lorne Michaels was no longer producing the show when he did the show. I think it was 1981. So I'm still sticking with Christopher Walken, but I think I agree. To me, it would be, it's Walken, Gould, neck and neck to the finish line. And then it's a photo finish for me, based on just thinking that Christopher Walken has had more of an impact. But it's tough.
All right. Andy, that was your pick. We're back to you, John.
Yeah, I'll go for some writers here that I think are largely influential on the history of the show, and that would be Franken and Davis. I think they, to me, have to get in if you're thinking about important writers in the history of the show. Obviously, Absolutely. They come on and they are like really green at the beginning and just learning behind veterans like Herb Sargent and other, writing styles on the show. And then they pick up steam really quickly, write some really important sketches in the history of the show from the original era. Obviously, they then come back when Lorne comes back later on, and Al Franken and Tom Davis are writing really great sketches in the second generation, and Al Franken is, sort of a pseudo cast member where he's appearing on Update a lot. And for me, they are a really important part of the creation and then continued existence of the show. So I would definitely put them in.
Great. That's a pick that I thought they were going to go into the first ballot, but I don't know if there's just a recency bias to our voters or whatnot. So my understanding is the bulk of what's remaining is going to be, sort of 70s or 80s based stuff. So I just want to reiterate, if you're listening to this, really listen to the upcoming presentations, because these guys have to get in. They just have to get in, and they only have 10 years. So, get it done sooner than later. That's what I would say. Does anybody else have anything to say about Franken and Davis?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo John, they're two of the most important members of both golden eras. They come back and have an even more senior role behind the scenes during that late 80s stint. So to me, it's a no-brainer, excluding the fact that Al Franken later goes on to become a U.S. senator, which, not for nothing, again, shows the cultural weight of the show too. That you could be a writer and a producer and a cast member, and that merits you an opportunity to be in the United States Senate.
You could host SNL and then become president.
Yeah, good God. But yeah, so just long story short, I think of all the writers, you think about the Jim Downeys of the world and some of the other people on my ballot, Franken and Davis definitely are part of that group and deserve induction.
All right. Does anybody else?
Absolutely. No, I agree. And you think about, just Show Us Your Guns, America, that famous, if you like having those short films on Saturday Night Live, they're the pioneers of that, right? Franken and Davis, that's what they're doing in those first seasons. So yeah, I think they are definite, no question.
Are they're on yours then?
Yeah.
And Andy, they were on yours as well?
Yeah.
Gosh, when I don't mark it down,
Sorry,
this is why I have to mark it down. No, this is great. Andrew, who have you got next on your ballot?
Okay. It's another writer. Is that all right?
That's totally all right.
It's Jack Handey. Deep Thoughts with Jack Handey.
Mm-hmm. It's even more all right now.
who I think was who I'm a huge fan of Jack Handey. I think that in a show where the writers often have to disappear into the show, he was one of the first ones to come out of it. And, people thought Jack Handey wasn't a real person. They thought it was a made up name. People are always surprised that his name is actually Jack Handey. So for me, Deep Thoughts with Jack Handey, Tunces the Driving Cat, what was it? Malfeasance in Railway Engineering with Mark McKinney and George Clooney is another one. So I think Jack Handey's got to be in because he's so uniquely a part of the show, so important, and also kind of a writer who became famous out of the show, which is something that doesn't happen that often. We see it more, but he was almost the first in a lot of respects. So I have Jack Handey.
I
got to speak about it.
My era of high school, there wouldn't be a Monday that one of your water cooler quotes wasn't, one of Jack Handey's Deep Thoughts. It was just a ritual. So I'm real curious if Andy or John has Jack Handey on their ballots. John, how about you?
I don't have Jack Handey on my ballot. I think he's really an amazing writer, and probably look, these nominees are all really great.
Yeah.
A lot of them are going to get in eventually.
Yeah.
But right now, I just think I have writers that are more influential in the long run in terms of the history of the show. I think that he's really niche in his writing. Like a lot of times, a Jack Handey sketch when you see it, in addition to all the deep thoughts and all that stuff. But for me, he didn't crack my list.
Wow. And you don't sound fringy about it at all.
No, I don't. No. I think that there's other people on this list that are in the upper pantheon of the history of the show.
Fair enough. Andy, you said that you did have him.
I did. And, I think just because a writer has a singular voice should discount his influence or his legacy. I mean, Andrew, when you're rattling off some of his accomplishments, I don't think that you mentioned Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. Did you?
My God, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, you talk about having Phil Hartman. I mean, without Jack Handey, there's no Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer, right? I not to name drop myself or whatever, but I wrote a love letter to Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer for Entertainment Weekly at the end of last year, and just kind of talked about how that came about and why Jack Handey was such a brilliant writer, someone that everyone else looked up to. So yeah, I mean, I think that this one that was an easy one that someone like Jack Handey deserves to be on. So yeah, that's my stance on it.
All right. So we've got 2 of 3. And now we will go to Andy for your next pick.
All right. Well, so my next pick is, I've mentioned this a couple times, I have Elvis Costello, but to be honest, beyond the fact that he was like banned and that's like an iconic moment, I don't have too much. I just needed to have a musical guest. And
you can switch to Prince if you want.
If anyone, I'd go to Paul Simon, but I don't want to meddle too much. So that's Elvis Costello's case for you. Make of that what you will. And then the next one is just John Goodman, having him as another iconic host.
Does anybody else have Elvis Costello on their ballot?
I don't.
No.
And for what it's worth, Andy spent the majority of this podcast arguing about the cheaters in baseball, but he's perfectly fine putting someone banned from SNL on his ballot.
Well, he eventually came back.
He eventually got unbanned.
Yeah.
And he was sort of a big moment at the 40th, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Mr. Goodman.
Yeah, I mean, John Goodman, I think there's an actual case to make for that. John Goodman is yet another cast member that warrants his own best of. Had recurring characters, is one of the people who would make appearances on his own, and played Linda Tripp. And when I think of that second golden age, he's one of the hosts that jumps out along the lines of, Alec Baldwin and Tom Hanks.
I feel like he's almost Baldwin before Baldwin. Like he ran through the course of the 90s as Baldwin was rolling down the hill, becoming bigger and bigger and bigger on SNL. And then he stopped showing up, and then Baldwin took over a lot of the same beats,
right.
Like a big friend of the show. Does John Goodman show up anywhere else?
For me, definitely. I mean, there is, as far as accomplishments are concerned, there are 5 hosts I have in the upper pantheon of the history of the show. And that is Alec Baldwin, Steve Martin, John Goodman, Buck Henry, and Tom Hanks. And, you know, you have to put those five in terms of like their collection of what they put there. And he hosted 11 seasons in a row. So it's like, how can you argue that?
Yes, you can't. You can't, can you, Andrew?
No, I mean, it's the magic number 11, you know, it's pretty hard to beat. And he had his own signature sketches. And the fact that he was doing this when he was a part of in a very high moment in his career, he would be making time for Saturday Night Live. I didn't have him on my ballot, but I won't object. I mean, you can definitely, I mean, I'm still at Walken. I'm going Christopher Walken if there's just the one, obviously. But John Goodman is, I agree with John. He's in the top 5 for sure.
Well, it's your ballot ultimately, but you've got a couple decisions to make by the end of this show.
Yeah.
So
can I change my Elvis Costello to Paul Simon?
Sure, of course you can.
All right, let's do that.
Oh, then I'm taking away my John Goodman.
Okay.
Oh, you wanted
Goodman
Prince?
Prince? Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to give it to John Goodman just because I think it's still Walken for me this go round. But I agree he's a top 5.
So Goodman, and we're back to Jon Schneider, Mr. Saturday Night Network. What have you got for us?
So
Two
my
picks
friend,
left.
my friend Bill Kenny at the SNN would be very happy to know that I am going to put Robert Smigel on my ballot this time. I think that
Yes.
yeah,
Good
I
buddies?
think that. Yeah, he made it because, you know, I thought a lot about that discussion. I had an argument with him last time we did this about Seth Meyers versus Robert Smigel. And now that, you know, Seth got in, we're good. So I can put Smigel on my ballot here because I really think that I think he's so influential, probably the most important writing hire in that second generation that's going to carry into him really like carrying a lot of the show through some of the dog days. And, you know, between that and then TV Funhouse and his ability to influence a generation with, you know, all of his artistic work that he put into the show, I just have to say he is a definite on my ballot.
Oh, is there a greater comedic architect? Like, I mean, the 10, 15 years following SNL, his run at SNL, he was just doing things that became viral before viral was cool. And, you know, he's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I'm curious if either you gentlemen agree with John and I that he is phenomenal. Andy, I see you nodding.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you could make the case that Robert Smigel is the most important writer in the history of the show. You know, like, I think that's an honest debate, you know, with like the Jim Downeys of the world or what have you, you know. Smigel has influenced so many cast members, so many sketches. He's done so much, you know. When it's like when you see that the Hans and Franz movie is now a podcast,
yes,
with Conan and Dana Carvey and Kevin Nealon. You know, the fact that it has Smigel's stamp of approval and his involvement alone, you know that it's going to be worth checking out, right? He's just got a high bar from Triumph the Insult Comet Dog. I mean, he's such a prolific writer. Yeah, I love almost anything that he's a part of. You know, like John mentioned, TV Funhouse, and not for nothing, this is again a humble brag. I had the opportunity to talk to Robert Smigel at the Sandler Kennedy Center Honors a couple months back. Just an incredibly gracious guy, and you can just tell that he's one of these people that's always behind the scenes making other things funnier. You know,
wow.
So yeah, you can't overestimate or understate his role at that second golden era, and just the things that he's been able to do with Sandler and Chris Rock and whatnot over the years too. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I'm on that hill. Are you on that hill, Andrew?
4 it is. Absolutely. He's brilliant and, you know, and has had an incredible career after. Everything that has been said, I agree. And he brought a kind of priapic element to Saturday Night Live. There was a dangerousness to some of his work, which of course manifests itself in the height with Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, which is great. So I think Smigel for sure. He's great. He's got to be there.
Awesome. Well, we'll stick with you, Andrew, with your second to last pick, because Andy and John each only have one left if they chose to use it.
Oh, okay. Well, it's someone you guys may or may not agree with, which is Michael O'Donoghue.
Okay.
I do think that he has to be in the Hall of Fame because I think that if you understand his stature as a comedic presence and a writer coming out of National Lampoon, at the time, his contribution to the show was pivotal. And he brought that kind of weird, absurdist, prankster humor. I think if you think of Andy Kaufman, you have to sort of also think of Michael O'Donoghue. So, I think it was his impression of Elvis having a knitting needle stuck in his eye. I'm paraphrasing that kind of thing that's coming out of National Lampoon, which was a fairly aggressive and transgressive, publication. That was really pivotal. He's not there for a huge amount of time, and he's not a huge presence on screen, but when he's there, he's important. So I'd make the case for him. But then, again, as we've found today, there's so many great people. But I'm going to say Michael O'Donoghue.
All right. I think divisive at the time, divisive so far in the Hall of Fame. Are we going to be divisive with the two other candidates here, or two other panelists here? Andy has a thumbs up. I've just given it away, which is terrible. But Andy, tell us why.
Yeah, I got the official biography of Mr. Mike right here.
Wow.
Dennis Perrin. So yeah, I Andrew just said it very well. I thought, he's such an important voice early on. He pops up again in season 6, so he's part of the lore and the mythology, keeping SNL dangerous when it still wanted to be dangerous. Not only is he an important writer, head writer, but he's a cast member, and he's Mr. Mike. He has the first SNL spin-off movie, I think. So yeah, he was the last person on my ballot. I mean, looking over it, there's like the Justin Timberlakes of the world and John Mulaney's. But as I've said throughout this episode, they'll have their time. Now's Mr. Mike's time.
Great. John?
I had him on my ballot in previous seasons, and I said that there should be like a room in the Hall of Fame named after Michael O'Donoghue.
Right.
I think he's that important, and he should get in, but he just didn't crack my ballot this time because it's just such a stacked lineup. And I really felt like I can't argue against anything Andy or Andrew said. It's just that he is, I guess, limited to a certain era, and that era really created the show. So I might be contradicting myself here, but I just felt like everyone else on my ballot probably had a stronger case over him at this point.
Well, at the end of the day, we're trying to do this as objectively as we can, but there's your taste is going to leak into that, right?
The love-hate relationship between the viewers of the show and even the people working at the show and Michael O'Donoghue definitely is a factor in terms of how you evaluate him. Yeah.
I think for sure. That's why.
And Bates and Michael O'Donoghue. That's a stormy weather for sure.
All right, John, who have you got as your final pick?
Well, Andy mentioned him very briefly, but I'm bringing sexy back. I could not have a ballot without Justin Timberlake because, we talked a lot about the first generation, first golden era, the second golden era. Well, the third golden era's host of all hosts was Justin Timberlake. I mean, every time he came in, it was a event. You had to be there to watch when Justin Timberlake hosted Saturday Night Live. He had like incredible sketches. I mean, he just as a person, I mean, his ability to like dance and act and sing and then involve that all with just putting on like an absolute show. I mean, I've been to Justin Timberlake concerts. It's just like unreal what the guy does. I mean, just watching Saturday Night Live and getting to see him on screen at the show, to me, is some of the most excited I've ever been to watch the show. Saying all of that, I miss him not being on the show. It's been a while since he's been there, and I really would love to see him come back and host again. But, one of the last times that we got to see him on the show was opening up SNL 40, probably the most important and influential night on my SNL, watching career, and getting to see him open that up with Jimmy Fallon and, singing about the history of the show. I know he's a great appreciation for Saturday Night Live. So for me, I just will, every single season, I have a spot for Justin Timberlake on my ballot.
Justin Timberlake obviously does not appear on Andy's ballot. His is full. Andrew has one spot left. He's got a couple balls in the air, though. Or does he stamp down and give us his 15th?
So,
Andrew, what have you got for us?
Either I go for Justin or I put forward my last ballot, correct?
Or you pick the Lonely Island.
Or I picked the Lonely Island. So we're bartering now. I think everything that John said about Justin Timberlake, who doesn't, by the way, need praise from me. I think he's probably feeling okay, hopefully, wherever he is. But he's a fantastic host. You always want to make sure to see him. I always loved the Barry Gibb talk show. I mean, where he did very little, but he did a lot. So just for that, I'm almost inclined to go with Jon. But I kind of wanted to make an argument for my last person. So I guess I'm going to pass on Justin Timberlake.
All right.
Because I do think he'll get it down the line. And, I just like to put it out there into the ether, my last person.
Andy, was it ever even considered Justin Timberlake?
Absolutely. It definitely was. Like I've said a few times, this was just a philosophic decision that, people after the year 2000 should have a separate moment. And now is the time to get in some of the dustier writers and some of the older people. Let's induct them, give them their moment in the hall. And then, someone like Andy Samberg or Justin Timberlake, or John Mulaney, those are like no-brainers. Once, like Robert Smigel or Dana Carvey, for God's sakes, once they're in. But yeah, I mean, John, again, said it very well. Andrew, I think I'm aligned with you as well, too, that, Justin Timberlake, such an excellent host. I was actually just wondering about this the other day, why he hasn't come back to host in the last decade. John, do you have any either observations or insights or gossip? Because we know that you're on the inside, John. You probably know.
I would venture to guess it's similar to a lot of hosts in the history of the show, which is when you go and host Saturday Night Live and you bond with a specific cast and then all those people leave the show, you're less inclined to want to go back and then not know anybody in the room.
So I guess he doesn't care that Keenan and Colin Jost are still around?
I guess not.
Because it is glaring that he comes up so often in the late 2000s, and then all of a sudden it's like.
I would say the argument that is concurrent with his sort of mainstream popularity.
Well, right. Yeah, I would say there is
not to take anything away from him,
No, for sure, but I would say there's a very reasonable chance he hosts during season 50, which I would believe that those hosts for that season will be just a Rolodex of the greatest hosts in the history of the show.
Jamie, you just got a scoop. John is speaking from Mount High.
Wow.
He's got not Lauren in his ear, but people who talk to Lauren.
Yes, you heard it here first. Those will be the uppercase of the tweet that goes out.
You have to listen to an hour and a half of the show to get here. So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we only have one ballot left to reveal. And Andrew, before you reveal that, I want to ask the three of you just as sort of a fun exercise. You don't have to answer now. You can wait till after Andrew presents his last ballot. But I just wonder, John, you brought up the 40th, opened with Jimmy Fallon and Justin Timberlake. Assuming they go with a duo again, who does the 50th open up with?
I always predicted.
And you don't have to answer it now, but.
Okay, well, if you want my answer, I predict they will open with a redo of the Wolverine sketch.
Oh, wow. That's great.
That's not a scoop. That's just a guess.
No, that's cool. So who are the two actors then?
I don't know, but it would be a derivative of Belushi and O'Donoghue.
Okay. Anybody else want to partake in that little thought experiment, or should we move on?
It's a very interesting theory. It's like the grassy knoll, that it'll be the remake of the Wolverine. I hadn't thought of that. That would be very, very cool. You mean like what, two people? Boy, oh boy. I mean,
who are the 40th? Like who of the from season 40 to 50 is equivalent of Fallon and
like Mulaney and Pete Davidson would probably.
Yeah, I was going to say
probably,
John Mulaney has to be there, and.
Or the 40s are also really well known for being the era of like the women of SNL taking over the show. So I wouldn't argue against having Kate and Cecily do something like that too.
Yeah,
actually, right. Kate McKinnon and John Mulaney maybe or something like that, or the two. Yeah, you're right.
Well, anyway, that was a detour. Sorry, folks. I know we're running long here, but we'll wrap up with this. Basically, Andrew's last ballot that he has to cast. Who is it, Andrew?
Well, you said to be impartial, but this one is not particularly impartial on my part. I'm casting my mind back to like 1995, 96, when Saturday Night Live was going through some turbulence. It was the first time I got to interview Lorne Michaels, and I remember him saying that there were people who were unhappy with the casts. And he said, I don't know if it's funny or not, but I think it's funny. And that's sort of summed it up. And someone who made it through with David Spade and other people, I'm talking about Molly Shannon. So I'm going to vote for Molly Shannon. She was always one of my personal favorites. I love her work. I love the exuberance and the innocence that she brings to a lot of her characters. And I always think that that she was a big part of that sort of, I wouldn't call it a full renaissance, but there was a nice big shift in the mid 90s, I think, and she was a big part of that. So I'd argue for Molly Shannon to be in the Hall of Fame, with the caveat that, everybody else everybody should be in, but unfortunately there's only so much room in the hall, or it's not a hall. So then it's a living room. So, so I'm going to say Molly Shannon. So I'll throw it
Great
out.
pick.
The Hall of
Great
Very
pick.
Good.
And she showed off she got to show off her chops again this year. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects her vote. Having people have her thrust back into their memory.
Well, she is very relevant these days. She's in the other two. Like, she has so many projects that are popular right now. She was in White Lotus.
Yeah.
White Lotus. I love you for that. And that on you, whatever. And her memoir is really good.
Did either of you guys ever think, like, for a moment, that she would be on yours? Or were you guys pretty locked in to your ballots?
She probably should be. Especially if we're talking about, the historic significance of like Jan Hooks and stuff. I think some of that could be also shared with Molly. Just a tough ballot, man.
She's the first Lorne run, not ready for primetime player to come back and host as a female, right? I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Oh.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think Molly Shannon is fantastic, and I love her. I think she's so great, so important. But for me, just didn't crack it.
That's all right. Well, I think you gentlemen are all fantastic, and I love that you did this today. This is really great. Your ballots will be in the show notes so people can see them. And, if you want, you can tweet it out and let people know where they can find this show and hear your riveting arguments on it. You guys were really great. Thank you so much. John, where can people find more of your work?
Well, right now we are dealing with a writer's strike in real life. So the season 48 coverage ended a little bit abruptly, but we have now officially moved on to the postseason coverage of season 48. So if you really enjoyed getting to see everything from the season, you'll enjoy our wrap-up coverage from season 48, including our postseason roundtable. We also have a lot of analytics talk with Mike Murray, where we have our postseason by the number show. And we go through every cast member on the Saturday Night Network and talk about their season from an analytics perspective. And then we have plenty of summer content coming around, including some interviews, SNL stories, and lots of fun summer series that we like to do at the Saturday Night Network. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on social media at the SNL Network, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. And thank you for having me back, Jamie.
Oh, it was great to have you. Andrew, where can people learn more about you or find out more about you?
If you're interested, I write a column on driving, a humor column on driving for the Globe and Mail. And I'm also to be found at Humber College running the comedy writing and performance program, where we get a lot of interesting guests and have podcasts and that kind of thing. And I'm sketching out my first book was the history of Canadian comedy called Stand and Deliver Inside Canadian Comedy, which may be one of the worst titles ever come up with if you're trying to sell a ton of books. But I am outlining a new book to look at sort of a second wave of Canadian comedy. But you'll have to wait years. I might even get inducted into something by the time that comes out. So, but it's been great to be here. I love talking about all this stuff. And you guys are all super. Thanks.
Great to have you. Andy, how about you?
Folks can check me out on Twitter. I'm one of the people on Twitter. My account is SNL in Review. Also, I contribute to Entertainment Weekly, places like Vulture, if you want to check out some more of my writing. Or also, when John was talking about, the SNL Network's content, you can periodically find me on some of those. Some of the older shows, some of the very original shows, but I'm on there. So thanks again for having me on this, Jamie. This was really fun. So I'm excited to see who the next class is.
Yeah, me too. And we'll find out on June 23rd of this year, next week, in fact. So that'll be really a lot of fun. Thank you again so much. We'll talk to you all soon. And do me a favor, as you're finding your way out, as you walk past the Weekend Update exhibit, turn out the lights because the SNL Hall of Fame is now closed.
Thanks for listening to the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. Make sure to rate, review, share, and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media at SNL HOF. This is Doug Denant saying, see you next week.
To podcasts and such.
The holidays are just around the corner, so now's the time to shop new deals at Lowe's. Make your home even merrier with up to 75% off select pre-lit artificial Christmas trees, holiday lights, and more. Plus, don't miss our limited-time weekly deal drops on items like appliances, tools, and grills. There's something for everyone on your list. Count on Lowe's to help you save all season long, because Lowe's knows deals. Valid 12/5 through 12/11 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.